I'm Rosemary. The divorce papers landed on the kitchen counter with a dull thud, as if they were just another piece of junk mail. My husband, Ethan, didn't even bother to look at me as he placed them there. He was making himself a cup of tea, his back turned, looking as calm as if he was discussing the weather. Sign these and leave. This house is no longer yours, he said, his voice cold and detached. I stood there in my slippers on the hardwood floor that I had painstakingly chosen from countless showrooms. I stared at the manila envelope with my full legal name, Rosemary Thompson, typed on the front. A strange feeling welled up inside me, not exactly pain or shock, but something far more insidious. It was like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, revealing a picture I'd been dreading for so long. 2 days ago, I had transferred $50,000 from my personal savings account, money I had saved over 5 long years, to the hospital for Ethan's mother, Mrs. Thompson's heart surgery. Mrs. Thompson was 65 years old, with a history of heart problems. The doctor said the surgery couldn't wait, and insurance only covered 60% of the cost. Ethan had lost his savings in a failed business venture, and his mother had no liquid assets. Without hesitation, I stepped in to help. After the surgery was confirmed, Ethan hugged me in the hospital parking lot. He buried his face in my hair and said, "You saved her life. I'll never forget this." I believed him wholeheartedly. But now, just 2 days later, here were the divorce papers. To understand how I got to this point, how a woman who thought she had a loving marriage and a bright future ended up standing in her kitchen holding divorce papers, we need to go back a few years. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon in September. The leaves on the oaks outside our house in the suburbs of Seattle were starting to turn golden, creating a beautiful autumnal scene. I was sitting on the porch, sipping a cup of hot chocolate, watching our neighbor's Labrador dig in the garden. I remember thinking, I can't believe this is my life. I was in my late 20s. I had a job I loved as a marketing manager at a tech startup. I had a good salary, great benefits, and I religiously contributed to my 401k because my mother had worked in a factory all her life and retired with very little. I drove a 2-year-old Toyota Camry that I had bought used and paid off. I also had a savings account with a substantial amount of money in it. And of course, I had Ethan. Ethan Thompson, 32, was a software engineer at a local tech firm. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a warm smile. He was the kind of guy who would hold the door open for you and remember your favorite coffee order. We met at a friend's New Year's Eve party 3 years ago. He was the one organizing the fireworks, completely unfazed by the chaos around him. He handed me a glass of champagne and said, "You look like you could use this." We dated for a year and a half, moved in together, and got engaged on a random Wednesday in June. We didn't do it on a special occasion because Ethan said he wanted it to be a spontaneous expression of his love, not a forced tradition. We got married the following August in a small beach wedding with our closest friends and family. Our marriage was not perfect. We had our share of arguments, mostly about mundane things like whose turn it was to do the dishes or whether we should get a new couch. Ethan was sometimes too laid back about making decisions, always saying, "Whatever you think is best." And I was a bit of a control freak, always planning and worrying about the future. But I thought we loved each other. Ethan's mother, Mrs. Thompson, lived about 30 minutes away. She was a retired schoolteacher, a strong-willed and opinionated woman. At first, our relationship was a bit rocky. She thought I was too independent and didn't fit her idea of a traditional daughter-in-law. But over time, we found a way to get along. We had Sunday dinners together every few weeks, and I even learned to make her favorite apple pie. Then, about a year ago, Mrs. Thompson called Ethan one evening. He took the call in the bedroom with the door closed, which was unusual. He was in there for over an hour. When he came out, his face was pale and drawn. "Mom's heart condition has worsened. She needs surgery," he said, his voice trembling. I asked how much it would cost, and he told me it would be around $50,000 after insurance. Without a second thought, I said, "I'll transfer the money." I saw a look of relief and gratitude on his face, and I thought that's what marriage was all about, being there for each other in times of need. The surgery was scheduled for a Friday in December, right in the middle of the holiday season. It was a logistical nightmare, but I took time off work to drive Mrs. Thompson to her pre-op appointments. Ethan said he had an important project at work and couldn't take time off. I believed him. During the surgery, I sat in the waiting room with Ethan. When the doctor came out and gave us the good news, Ethan hugged me tightly and said, "You made this possible." I felt like I was on top of the world. But things started to change a few weeks after the surgery. I noticed that Ethan had started putting his phone face down on the table when he came home. He also started staying up late, long after I had gone to bed. When I asked him about it, he said he was just stressed at work. I didn't think much of it at first. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan told me he was going to meet a friend to watch a football game. I stayed home, did some cleaning, and caught up on my favorite shows. When he came home around 7 p.m., he smelled different. It wasn't the smell of a sports bar, it was the smell of a woman's perfume. I didn't say anything, but a little seed of doubt was planted in my mind. I started paying closer attention to his behavior. I noticed that he was always on his phone, even when we were having dinner. He would get up and take calls in another room, and when I asked who it was, he would get defensive. I also found a receipt from a fancy restaurant in a town about an hour away. It was for a dinner for two on a night when he had told me he was working late. I confronted him about it, but he denied everything. He said it was a business dinner with a client. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, one day, I came home from work early and found Ethan's car in the driveway, along with his mother's. I was surprised because Mrs. Thompson always called before she came over. I stood on the porch for a moment, and through the window, I saw them sitting in the living room, talking in hushed tones. When I opened the door, they both looked up, and their expressions changed. Ethan tried to act normal, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. Mrs. Thompson looked at me with a strange expression, as if she was torn between loyalty to her son and a sense of guilt. "Hey, I didn't expect you home so early," Ethan said, his voice a bit too bright. "I left work early," I replied. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Mrs. Thompson said, but her voice sounded forced. I went upstairs to change, and when I came back down, Mrs. Thompson was gone. Ethan was in the kitchen, pretending to cook. I knew then that they had been talking about me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list of all the things that had been bothering me. The late nights, the strange phone calls, the receipt. I looked at the list and realized that I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. I decided to do some investigating on my own. One day, when Ethan left his phone at home, I couldn't resist looking at it. I knew it was an invasion of his privacy, but I needed to know the truth. I found a series of text messages between him and a woman named Lily. The messages were full of love and affection, and it was clear that they had been having an affair for months. I felt like my world was crashing down around me. I had given $50,000 to his mother, and he had been cheating on me behind my back. I was devastated, but I knew I had to be strong. I didn't confront Ethan right away. I needed to think about my next move. I knew that if I confronted him without a plan, he would have the upper hand. I contacted a divorce attorney, recommended by a friend. Her name was Miss Carter, and she was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s. Ms. Carter listened to my story and told me that Illinois, where we lived, was an equitable distribution state. She said that because I had made a significant down payment on the house and had been the primary earner for the last year, I was entitled to a larger share of the equity. She also said that the $50,000 I had given for Mrs. Thompson's surgery was considered a gift, but we could argue that it was a financial contribution to the family. I followed Miss Carter's advice and filed for divorce. When Ethan found out, he was shocked. He tried to convince me to change my mind, but I was determined. The next few months were a blur of legal battles. Ethan hired an attorney, and the two sides went back and forth. There were financial disclosures, depositions, and long meetings with our respective lawyers. In the end, we reached a settlement. I kept the house, and I bought out Ethan's share of the equity at a price that reflected my larger down payment. He took his 401k, and we split the joint accounts. The $50,000 for Mrs. Thompson's surgery was a loss, but I decided to let it go. I knew that holding on to it would only cause more pain. The divorce was finalized in March. Jennifer, my best friend since college, took me out to dinner to celebrate. We went to a nice Italian restaurant downtown. As we sipped our wine, Jennifer looked at me and asked, "How do you really feel?" I thought for a moment and said, "It's like I've been carrying a heavy burden for so long, and now I've finally put it down. My arms still feel the weight, but they're free now." A few weeks after the divorce, I received a letter from Mrs. Thompson. It was a handwritten note, and it said, "What you did for me was a selfless act. I know what it cost you, and I'm sorry for not standing up for you sooner." I read the letter and felt a sense of closure. I knew that the past was behind me, and I was ready to start a new chapter in my life. I still color-code my budget spreadsheets, and my 401k is doing well. The new weather stripping on the back door, which I installed myself, fits perfectly. Sometimes, on those beautiful September afternoons when the oaks outside are ablaze with color, I sit on the porch with a cup of hot chocolate and think, I can't believe this is my life. And this time, I know it's a good thing.